Good afternoon. My name is Carlo Picado, and today I will be discussing my findings on comparing Japanese and Czech funerals in terms of history, progression, and religion. When considering death, some may describe death as a time of mourning or a devastation of human emotions, while others may describe death as the human soul passage of life into another spiritual world. James Geyer, a professor of the Virginia Military Institute, has stated that regardless of how or where we are born, what unites people of all cultures is the fact that everyone eventually dies. Different cultures vary in how they conceptualize death and what happens when every person dies. Death is an element of life that makes everyone human, yet it has a different significance for every culture and society. Moreover, there have been particularly interesting shifts in the perceptions of death and funeral practices, specifically among the Czech Republic and Japanese groups. Such shifts in the discernment of death among these cultures gives rise to the question: which of these cultures' perception of death has the most beneficial impact on the emotional and societal state of its people? Despite having taken a more private industrial approach in funeral practices, Japanese funerals have managed to maintain their role as an event for building societal relations and honoring the life of the deceased, whereas Czechs have yet to move on from their secular beliefs regarding funerals. Therefore, Japanese funerals have been more successful in maintaining their significance to the deceased and their families. In order to better understand the critical components that make up each kind of funeral, it was essential for me to take into account the historical factors of each culture, beginning with the funerary history of the Czech Republic. During the 20th century, the Czech funerals transitioned from burial in the ground to cremation. This change became so prevalent to the culture of the Czech Republic that some newspaper headlines in the country itself began claiming that Czechia was a cremation superpower, a world champion in cremation, if you would. Even in its modern state, there are still deeply rooted taboos concerning death among the majority of the Czech Republic. Many people try to avoid talking about death and dying. Consequently, those who have to cope with death of a relative or a friend minimize the funeral ritual. The way in which the Czechs treat the thought of death is similar to that of the Dalai Lama's way of thinking, in which he said that for a non-believer or non-theist like me, we must develop this deeper level of joy through training the mind. This kind of joy comes from within. However, instead of being able to develop a deeper level of joy through different means, most Czechs would have to minimize their relatives' funerary rites and mourn their death in a discreet manner due to the views of their society. Currently, the situation is now changing. People are slowly becoming more open about the way they deal with death and dying. It is once again becoming an accepted part of life. Therefore, it could be argued that the Czechs' previous minimalist approach toward the topic of death was simply a societal attitude of the past and is currently undergoing reform. Although this may be true, it is also important to note that this change is not immediate, nor has it been properly accepted by a majority of the Czech population. Jonathan Evans from the Pew Research Center found that 72% of Czechs declared to be irreligious. As a result, the customary secular funeral ceremony, held in a crematorium, is not entirely suited to meeting the ends of the bereaved, and this is born out of the fact that about 1/3 of all cremations are held without a funeral ceremony. Olga Nesporova from the Research Institute of Labor and Social Affairs has stated that funeral trends are set to change, and a relatively high number of bereaved deciding to omit the funeral altogether might well decrease. Therefore, as rituals are dynamically transforming, according to the changes of society, funeral rites in the Czech Republic should become more diverse, more complex, and new forms should emerge in the future. In regard to the funerary history of the Japanese funerals have experienced various changes in the way they reflected the beliefs of society until it became the privatized rite that it has become today. During the early history of Japan, funerals were traditionally handled by neighborhood funeral cooperatives and had the characteristics of a village event. The funerals were arranged so that as many people as possible could attend and were organized in a way so that contact with the deceased and participation in mortuary rites were organized in a way so that apologies for that, I repeated myself. Okay. So that contact with the deceased and participation in mortuary rituals started with the people who had the closest connection to the deceased and proceeded to those who had the most distant connection. Over time, changes in funerals would translate to a shift in focus from the funeral as a rite of sending off the dead to one of receiving condolences. Soon, Japanese funerals would become limited to immediate family, making it a private affair. However, this change would also result in an increase of businesses shouldering the funeral responsibilities once held by the family members of the deceased, thus causing the topic of death to be more subtle among people and kept privatized to certain family members of the deceased. Additionally, Muramaki Kokyo of the Japanese Journal of Religious Affairs has even stated Recently, with the continued urbanization of funerals, there has been a gap between those who favor innovative individualistic affairs, while there are those who believe that society should bury its dead in traditional ways. Although both the Japanese and Czech culture groups have undergone and established similar taboos over death, what set them apart from each other is that, unlike the Czechs, the Japanese actually regained an interest in death in recent years. There have even been reform movements that have been created that argued that it is not about how should someone be buried, but rather asking themselves, how do I want to be buried? Interestingly, a connection can be seen with religion and cremation. Notably, Martina Hubkova from Charles University created a database for cremation rates and religiosity in European countries from 1920 to 2010, and noticed that cremation rates increased in countries such as the Czech Republic, where there was less religion. This database shows a significant increase in cremation rates starting at 10% in 1945 to an approximate 80% in 2010. On the other hand, a majority of Japan's funerals consist of a mixture of Shinto and Buddhist styles, in which the deceased are buried in a family grave. Therefore, it can be concluded that Japanese funerals have a more positive impact on the people than Czech funerals have as a result of its crucial role that religion plays in both kinds of funerals. One possible solution to improve Czech funeral rites is for people to be more open to religion and to practice a wider variety of burial rites rather than cremation. However, some limitations of this solution is that not everyone would be willing to change their beliefs in an instant, and some people may actually prefer cremation over burial rites due to multiple other factors, including expenses. Thank you for your time and attention.